Coming to you from the shores of sparkling Lake Michigan, welcome to the National Writers Series, celebrating 15 years as a year-round book festival. We are the premier home for passionate readers who love inspiring conversations with best-selling and award-winning authors. Tonight, we welcome National Book Award finalist Angela Flournoy and her latest novel, The Wilderness. Spanning 2 decades in the lives of 5 Black women, The Wilderness traces their journeys through a young adulthood and into midlife as they navigate motherhood, ambition, estrangement, viral fame, and the trials of building lives in rapidly shifting cities like New York and Los Angeles. Flournoy is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and a writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Paris Review. She brings extraordinary nuance to the complexities of contemporary womanhood and the connections that sustain us. Flournoy will be joined in conversation by Audrey Irontree, who serves as the National Writers Series Education Director. She is a published fiction writer and is an editor, ghostwriter, and teacher. She received her MFA in fiction degree from Northwestern University, her BA from Brown University, and her associate degree from the Bard College at Simon's Rock. She is also the editor-in-chief of Muse Literary, an award-winning independent publisher. The National Writers Series salutes our amazing audiences, dedicated volunteers, and generous supporters for helping us raise the next generation of readers and writers through our free education programs across the region. This season of amazing authors is made possible through major support by the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology Group, Golden Fowler Home Furnishings, West Shore Bank, and Traverse City Tourism. Tonight's event is presented by Dillis Tostason Garcia and Lola Jackson, Community Building Conversations. Tonight's event underwriter is Diana Mylock. Tonight's book angels are Herm Triesenberg and Elizabeth Mostrom. Tonight's live streaming is exclusively underwritten by Nancy Davey. Thanks to our major media sponsor, the Traverse City Record Eagle, and our media partner, Interlochen Public Radio. For information on future events, programs, and how to support our nonprofit work, please visit nationalwritersseries.org. Now, please welcome to the stage National Writers Series co-founder Doug Stanton.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Milliken Auditorium here in Traverse City, Michigan. So glad to see all of you. We have a really excellent evening of conversation about a fabulous new novel by Angela Flournoy and our education director, as Kendall Kocher said in that really great intro. So I want to say a few things though before. Audrey Irontree has, if you're out in the lobby, pick up these papers. You can, if you have young people in your family that you want to pay attention and who like writing and creativity, these are opportunities. One of them is a horror writing class, which Audrey teaches, and she's excellent, and they're very fun, and they build community among young people. And your young person in your audience or in your family can also join the youth board at the National Writers Series and help us program our future. So that's one thing. Dune's Review is out. Michigan Writers, here's their business card. They've been around for a long time. Susan Odgers is always in our audience, along with Tom Mayer. Do pick up a copy of the Dune's Review. Do support them. Sign up on their mailing list. They're an important part of our writing community and have shepherded a lot of stories and poems into the world. And last, on October 16th, I'll be talking by live stream with Lance Richardson, who is the biographer of the new biography of the writer, naturalist, nonfiction, and novelist, Peter Matheson, which should be a very interesting event. Peter has passed away. He led a storied, legendary career that really spanned the post-World War II world of American letters. There's a very interesting, funny story about Ann Stanton and I being in our home here in Lake Ann, Michigan on 9/11, and Peter was flying overhead in an airplane, and he landed in Traverse City. And the phone rang, and it sounded like Thomas Jefferson was on the other end, and it was Peter Matheson saying if I was Doug Stanton, he'd been directed to call me. So we spent a week with him, and it was a fascinating week of getting to know Peter, taking him to J&S Hamburg, watching people snag salmon down by the weir, things like that. So we might talk about that kind of thing with Lance Richardson October 16th. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Angela Flournoy and Audrey Irontree.
Angela, welcome to Traverse City.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Have you ever been here before?
I have not, I
But
don't think.
you have spent some time in Michigan, is that correct?
I have spent a lot of time in Michigan, mostly in the Detroit area. But I was a Michigan Notable Book awardee in 2016, so I went around, but I never went. I think this is the farthest. I didn't go all the way up here. No.
And that was for the Turner House, right?
Yes.
Your first book, and it's set in Detroit.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your writing process for the Turner House?
Well, the Turner House is set in Detroit, and I have never lived in Detroit, but it is where my father's side of the family is from. So it's a place I've visited a lot, but for that book, I did a lot of research because I was interested in a kind of 60-year history of this house on the east side of Detroit for this one family. So I did, when I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop, I did a lot of research at the library there about just like oral histories, but also like history of like city planning there and politics and Great Migration, like sort of trends and patterns of where people landed when they came to Detroit. And this new book, very different research because it's about the present and a little bit into the future.
And when you were visiting your father's family in Detroit growing up, did you already know you wanted to be a writer?
Yes. One of my father's 5 sisters, my father's one of 13, gave me a note, like a journal when I was 6, and I've wanted to be a writer since then.
You've spoken about how writing The Wilderness a little was different than the Turner House. Obviously, it's set now and a little in the future. Mm-hmm. What was different in the world in which you wrote the Turner House? Why that book then?
It's interesting because a lot of people say that the Turner House doesn't feel like a first novel in the sense that it's not, that it is like big, right? It's not just sort of about, it's not about coming of age. It's not very, like its concerns are not very just individual. They were kind of larger concerns about like the history of this country and maybe the future of this country and especially the future of Detroit. But that was the sort of ambitions I had for my first book. I wasn't interested in writing a kind of autobiographical story, but in a way, obviously it still is. It's an exploration of my origin in the sense of where my father came from. And this book, ironically, I think of as a kind of coming of age novel, not coming from adolescence into young adulthood, but coming from what I call real age, which is from young adulthood into middle age.
I'm wondering, I want to be clear for our audience that the Turner House also features a family with 13 siblings. And
Yes.
so it's really ambitious in its scope. And in some ways, so is The Wilderness. You have five main characters. What interests you in all of these different viewpoints?
I like to consider it, it's more like 4, and as we say in spades, 4 and a possible, right? So, because there's 4 friends. It's about this group of 4 friends, but it's also, the book has on the periphery one of the friends' estranged sister. So this is the possible. Like, she is not a part of the friend group, but she does kind of like exist in the book, and she does have a few moments that are about like just her. And what was the second half of your question?
I don't know, because I was thinking about Danielle, which is something I want to ask you about later,
Yes.
because I'm so interested in her and a character. No, my question was, what draws you to all of these multiple perspectives?
Oh, well, I think that when I think about characters, a very early question in my mind is, what do other people think about them? Not that I am a person who spends my life concerned with what other people think about me, but when we think about how people present themselves, how people understand themselves in the world, it's as part of a community or whatever way that they've organized themselves into a network. Few people live just like in a bubble or in a vacuum. And so for me, if I wanted, in the Turner House, I wanted to tell a story of family, it felt like I could tell a story of one person's perspective of that family, but that's not the story of the family. I would need to tell from many perspectives to get a sense of what the thing is really like. And so similarly with this book, I wanted to tell a story about this group of women, not just one of their experience being part of that group. And so I had to tell it from these different viewpoints.
Yeah, and for our audience who might not have read the book yet, can you just tell me briefly, what is The Wilderness about?
So The Wilderness follows a group of 4 friends. Their names are Desiree, January, Nakia, and Monique, and the possible is Danielle. From their 20s into their 40s, and it's set in New York and LA in 2008, and it projects a little bit in the future to 2028. And so it's about 20 years in their friendships, how they evolve or devolve and evolve again and come back together. And it's also about the last 20 years of American life.
I read that you almost titled this book The Millennials. Why?
Kind of, to be cheeky, because it bothered me that when you think about a millennial, the avocado toast eating person that you see in your mind is not a Black woman, generally. And that bothered me because I felt like some of the negative stereotypes associated that I have to wear the burden of, I'm spending too much on lattes, I'm eating all this avocado toast, I love certain shades of pink. I have nothing to do with these things. Like, this has nothing to do with me. But there's this assumption that is like a generational marker for all of us. And I wanted to push back against that and really make the claim that like this experience is the millennial experience, and that there are things that these women experience that transcend, some of those consumerist descriptors to get at the heart of what it's like to have come of age, post 9/11, during the never-ending war on terror, post Great Recession, what it is like to have grown up in that period of time once we strip down all of the consumer profile. But my editor did not like it.
Why did your editor not like it? As a millennial myself.
Well, she is I'm what they call an elderly millennial. She is a young Xer, and she said, but a lot of people don't like millennials. And they're gonna be alienated. And I thought, well, they might, sometimes you read books for weird reasons. Sometimes you read them thinking you're gonna hate it, and then you might love it. I thought that it could work to draw people in even if they wanted to resist it. But I ultimately thought that there is something that's a little bit more universal about the title, The Wilderness, and actually more useful for the conversations I wanted to have about this book.
How did you come to the title of The Wilderness?
For a long time, the title of the book was The Wounded Wilderness, which was a title I came to after I went to, I can't remember if it was the MoMA or the LACMA in LA, retrospective of the LA artist Betty Saar's work. Betty Saar is a brilliant multidisciplinary artist who has always lived in Southern California, who is in her 90s now, and she, in the 60s, I think like 61 or 62, was living in Laurel Canyon and painted like the sort of aftermath of a wildfire and made a silkscreen of it, and that work of art is called The Wounded Wilderness. And when I saw it, to me, being from LA and thinking about the things I was thinking about in this book about there's like life on the surface when you live in a place, and then every place has its other thing that is just part of living there in LA, which has been to sort of dramatic effect this year. Part of it is these fires. And there's a way that in the news, they always make it seem like they're new, but this was 1961 when she made it. Like, they have always been a thing that you just kind of metabolize as a threat. in addition to the big one being, the big earthquake that's going to push us off into the ocean or whatever. And so it seemed really appropriate, but it also wounded. It was a little more gothic probably than it needed to be, so.
Can I sort of hang on your turn of phrase, metabolize the threat? What other threats do you see these characters having to metabolize coming of age in this time?
A lot. I think that there's both internal and external. I think one of them is the threat of really self-alienation. One of the things that this book meditates on is just what role the internet and social media plays in our sense of self and how we decide, is our life good enough? So there's one character, the character Monique, who begins the book as a librarian, and then she has a little moment of virality. And then she decides she wants more such moments and decides she would like to instead figure out how to make a living as a kind of social justice poet, influencer person. And so the threat there is that as she starts to make a business out of self-narrativation and getting immediate positive or negative feedback about those narratives that she's putting on the internet, that she actually isn't a person anymore. She doesn't have a sense of self. So there's that kind of internal threat. And there's the everyday threats of climate change and living in an age of increased surveillance, and also living in an age of, what do we even call it? I mean, I think some people call it techno-fascism, but just a lot of law enforcement agencies wanting to have militaristic tools. To what end? There's all of those threats.
How do these women help each other through these threats? I'm thinking about, you mentioned the way others perceive us being important to kind of forming a self. And I'm thinking specifically about a scene where Nakia kind of questions Monique on this projected image. So what ways, in other ways, do you see these characters kind of helping each other navigate?
One of the meditations of the book is just about how do you remain in a person's life, choose. People talk a lot about chosen family, and they really posit it as if it's a one time you choose and then you guys are good. But it actually is many, many times you have to choose, right? Whether that's because somebody moves away or because it seems like your interests are diverging. There are just moments in your life where if you've had, and I imagine a lot of people here, I hope, have been lucky enough to have friends over decades, there are these moments where you realize maybe we're drifting apart and we've got to make a choice, right? Or I've got to make a choice. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to do this thing. And so one of the things that I thought was important in the book was to think about the ways that these women choose. And it's not just always showing up with a bottle of wine to watch a movie. Sometimes it's confrontation. And I do believe that conflict is not abuse. And so in this book, you will see these women, they are sometimes in conflict with each other because they're not treating each other right, or they're not treating themselves right, and their friend is calling them out on it. And it's something that I witnessed with the older women in my life who, my mother had a friend who I grew up calling my auntie for 51 years until my mother passed away. And they were people who, they like to say on the internet, they didn't call each other out, but they sometimes did have to call someone in, right? I see what you're doing with this guy and it's not safe, right? Or it's not healthy, or this job is ruining your life. What can we do to get you away from this job? And it's something that when I talk to younger people, they seem to have a lot of anxiety about relationships that require that kind of choosing, that have any kind of confrontation. But that's part of the work of being in community, is what I believe, is that doesn't mean, heaven knows, it does not mean that you need to become a person who is just saying, right? Nobody likes the person who is always just saying. But sometimes there has to be a hard conversation in order to continue to be friends with someone, in order to not just ghost them, right? And it's a thing that I see a lot, especially on social media, language basically giving people permission to ghost each other. Like, you might be in a season in your life where everyone can't come, and it's like, do they know? Did you tell them that they can't come? And why not? And maybe they can't, but sometimes it's worth having that communication, because maybe they didn't know they were behaving in such a way that you thought they couldn't come. So at least give them the chance to get their act together, so maybe they can come to this new season of your life. Yeah.
Of these 4 friends, which of them arrived in your imagination first?
Definitely Desiree. So the way the book opens is the order in which the entire book is not in the order that I wrote it, but the beginning is the beginning. I don't think this is a spoiler because it is in the first 15 pages. So the book begins with a young woman in her early 20s on a trip to Paris with her grandfather, who is in his 80s, and we discovered that he has decided to have a very sort of elaborate end-of-life plan. And he would like to have a couple days in Paris, and then he has paid a lot of money to have a medically assisted suicide in Switzerland. And this was a chapter that I wrote when I was still in grad school in 2011, I think, in Iowa. And I didn't know what it was, and maybe I was a little scared of it, so instead I decided to write a novel set in a place I never lived with 13 characters. That seemed easier.
So much less ambitious.
Yes, so instead I just put it to the side and I wrote the Turner House instead.
That's so interesting. I wonder what the difference was writing about the Turner House, which is a biological family, and we see them go through many of these conflicts. There's an altercation that even gets physical at one point, and these images of rupture and repair. How did it feel different writing about a chosen family?
Well, because not everybody. Some people are well-adjusted and they can put some distance between family members who need some distance. But I think a lot of us put up with a lot more people who we are biologically related to. And our culture supports it, right? Like, we support these reunions of people, blood relatives. Our culture doesn't really care if you stop being friends with somebody. That's on you, right? And a lot of people, when they get to a certain age or they get their nuclear family or whatever, they decide they don't have space in their life for their friends. I argue to their detriment, right? As they get older, suddenly you see why you might need some friends, right? But I think that it has to do with this idea of, when you get old, who are you supposed to be vulnerable around and who you're supposed to depend on? And obviously there's so much research that your quality of life is improved, by having a network that is outside of your nuclear family. But it still seems that people struggle to do that. But meanwhile, they'll just have the most toxic relationships with their family and just still be there every Thanksgiving.
Will you talk to me a little about the character of your reader? Who are you writing for? Who do you imagine picking up this book?
I don't really think about a person in a demographic sense. I had a teacher at Iowa who runs the program there, Samantha Chang, who I still consider a mentor all these years later. And she said once that the reader you should imagine a reader who is as smart as you and wants you to win. And those two things can work together, or they can work against each other, because if they're as smart as you, they're not going to say you won when you didn't do the work to win. But it's also not somebody who is you have to write against and be you don't have to be predicting and trying to cut cut off criticism before it happens, because this person wants you to do the thing that it seems you're intending to do in a book. And that's really what I think about, is somebody who is smart enough to understand what I'm doing, but also smart enough to know whether I've pulled it off or not. They want me to, but if I don't, I don't.
I think you did.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I've heard you describe yourself as a maximalist when it comes to writing your characters. This is specifically in regards to choosing to include their interests in music. What do you mean by maximalism?
I see the benefits as I get older and as I've traveled more. I see the benefits of writing a fiction that can kind of be like grafted onto any culture, a fiction that like does really well in translation because there's not a lot of super specific like cultural markers to it. And I just don't write like that. I try to write people who feel real by any means necessary. So that's both by the way that they see the world, by their particular way of seeing, but also by adorning them with the things that make people, whether it's like their personal style or the art that they're passionate about, all of those things. And I like that kind of fiction, and I've never balked from it. Like when I'm reading, you know, a 19th century Russian, I don't care that I have to keep looking in the back because I don't know these operas that he hates. I'd like to know him better, so I'm going to read about these operas so that I can understand, oh, what does it mean that he hates them, you know? That to me, that's like the joy of fiction, is that it can truly immerse you in another place, and you can time travel that way as well.
One of the sort of adornments you give your characters are descriptions of their interior worlds, and their interior worlds as in their literal interiors that they find themselves in. Mm-hmm. How do you see the way these characters make homes and spaces for themselves to live in as reflections of their internal worlds?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that I, as evidenced by the cover, which is not up there, which is an interior. An interior I really like and that I chose myself because I feel like it has a lot of rich narrative potential. When you look at it, it invites a lot of sort of questions about what kind of person's house it is. It also plays with some of our assumptions about what kind of house this is. In my mind, when I look at this art, which is by the artist Micheline Thomas, there's only two kinds of people who immediately come to mind might live in that house: a Black woman or a fabulous gay man, right? And either one, I'm interested in. I want to know more about what kinds of scenes have taken place in this living room. And similarly, the reason why I thought it was such a good pairing for the book is that it's layered. Like if you look, it's a collage. And so there are kinds of like Trompe l'oeil, like elements of like the fireplace and stuff. And I think about that when I think about characters, the way that there's like the surface level and then there are things that are sort of underneath them. And I don't know, we live in a world with things and with objects. Most of us are not. I would love if one was in the audience. We're not monks, right? So we have things, and it doesn't mean that those things characterize us, but our relationship to physical space is important.
Can I ask you to read a passage that's sort of revealing to this subject?
Sure.
This is Desiree's perspective, right?
Yes. And this is kind of taking the idea of physical space in relationship to a character, to a kind of like metaphorical place. You can be as happy as you truly hope to be. Desiree believed this. The problem was that January's hope for happiness was nebulous. She'd never set aside time or been forced by life to figure out the shape of her own ideal of happiness. Yes, part of the problem might be chemical. She was no doctor, but was beginning to understand that her friend tended toward depression. But what did happiness actually look like for January? It was important to have a clear sense of its shape. Desiree knew the shape it took for her, or rather, its architecture. It was a many-roomed home, a townhouse. There were areas she may never gain access to, but most doors could be opened. The ground floor, the foundation, food and shelter and security had been laid with great emotional costs, but minimal sweat from her brow. That was privilege in some people's eyes, not hers. The second floor was populated by the people she'd long loved, this desperate mothered child currently in her back seat, and by extension, her children, Nakia and Monique. Even the knowledge of the existence of her sister was on this floor, despite Danielle being on the other side of a long closed door. The third floor was mostly windows, a great room from which she could look out onto the world and feel a part of it, but no urgent need to run it or leave any mark on it. The great room would probably be depressing to a person like January who wanted so much, even more than she would ever admit out loud. But it was comforting for Desiree to think about, the contentment that came from being still and minding her own business.
I've heard you describe that showing us a portrait of these characters' intellectual lives as well as their emotional lives was important to you. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think that I've been thinking a lot lately about literary fiction as a genre. I think there is a way that some literary fiction writers think that literary fiction is the genreless genre. Like, it has no sort of identifying tropes or like patterns or tendency. But I do think that one thing, I think that's not true, obviously, because there are, when you start to think about marketing a book, you suddenly realize, oh, I am in a genre because I don't like certain ways that people talk about my book. I don't want people to talk about my characters in certain ways. And that is because that's not the tradition you feel like you're a part of. And I think that if literary fiction can do anything better than other genres, and I don't think they can necessarily, because there's quite literary mysteries, there's quite literary romances, etc. But if regular old realist literary fiction can do anything, it can spend more time in people's minds, right? It can afford it. It's decided that it can afford itself that space. It can spend time helping you understand how another person thinks, that person not being me, but a person of my creation. And so when I read fiction that feels like it should shy away from just capital T thought, it seems to me like, well, what are we doing here? Because we don't have any car crashes. Like, if we're not gonna have fun thinking about stuff, then you need to make a plot. Like, you've got to do the work of a genre if you're not going to be in the business of this.
Our characters think a lot because they find themselves in this sort of metaphorical wilderness of entering middle age. What makes this phase of life a wilderness, and has it always been this sort of wilderness, or are we in a landscape that's changing?
Yes. I think, I think that, well, the first question, so what I think about as it's this period of time being a wilderness, not the only one, for sure. But I think maybe the first really impactful one that I experienced, it has to do with our culture, pop culture, your school, its only job really, when you are a child, an adolescent, is to prepare you for adult life, right? But that's really just the life of, are you gonna go to college, or are you not gonna go to college? How are you gonna pay these first kinds of bills that you get? But it's not the life of, what do you do when you did go to college and you realize that this career is not viable anymore? What do you do when you lose a parent or you become a parent? What do you do when you do have enough money to pay all your bills, but you just do not feel satisfied with your life? What do you do when your body breaks down as you get older? These are the things that I feel like there are a lot fewer paths, like clear sort of paths a person takes. You have to figure it out on your own. Like, what is it going to take for you to feel like a real grown-up? Maybe you never do. That's okay. And what is it going to take for you to feel like a real sense of grounding in your life? And I think that everyone has to just kind of chart their own path in that respect.
Do you see a change in how we, especially as women, seek this sense of groundedness or satisfaction in our lives?
I think that if there is a big difference generationally, it is that the models for some of the stability are just, they're not viable for like younger people, right? So my mother worked one place for nearly 40 years and bought a home, retired. That is not viable. Like, that is not a viable life path for most people I know of my generation. And so the idea of like, there's like the sort of traditional, like everybody has this wilderness of getting it to middle age, but then also when you look around, what are the markers of being there? What are those markers? More and more of my friends do not have children. They do not plan to have children. More and more of my friends are not necessarily partnered in the traditional sense, but they still have to figure out a way to feel grounded. And so what is that going to take? If it's not those things, if it's not a nuclear family and, 2.5 kids and a dog, like what is it going to take to feel it?
I wonder if the wilderness posits that friendship is one of the ways that we do build that for ourselves.
You got it. Yes.
I read it. I loved it. I saw a post on your Instagram. I stalked you fairly heavily, which you describe readers memeing your book and like being like, oh, I'm such a Monique or I'm such a Danielle or something like that. If these characters are archetypes in this way, what type are you?
You know what? I don't know. I think that, I don't know. I think that I am probably a Monique, but also, I think that the thing that's really nice about writing a book that covers 20 years is that it feels less scary. Writers never want to be like, I'm not in the book. But I can say, and it feels fine to be like, there are eras of me from different moments in the past that I sort of have put into different characters. So in different moments in time, I feel like I have been all of them.
I've been thinking a lot about which one I would be, and I want to be a Nakia, but I think I might actually sort of be a Danielle. And I want to talk about her for a minute because she's that possible.
Should you be lying down? I feel like this is about to be therapy.
This is where I admit that I'm not well. Can we talk about the choice to include this character? This is Desiree's estranged sister, who, one review I read, it described her as haunting, sort of the first section of the book, mostly because of Desiree's grief at the arrangement. Why do you include her perspective near the end of the book? Why do we get to hear from her?
So, for those of you who haven't read, this is not a spoiler again because it's the first 15 pages. Desiree's grandfather does die, and Danielle, her sister, was not invited on this trip, and this creates a rift between them that Danielle basically just decides she does not want Desiree in her life for a long time. And I think it really had to do with generosity. I really strongly believe, and I believe it was Toni Morrison's Paris Review interview where she talks about how a novel is not a democracy. Readers sometimes want to know every character the same amount. They are like, I don't feel like I knew them enough. And that's fine if you feel that way. But a novel is not a democracy. I agree with that. Like, a novel has sometimes it can be a democracy, but often, if you really think about it, there is a hierarchy of characters. There's people you know better than others. There's people who get more page space than others. And in the beginning, I thought that Danielle would really just be a part of this inciting incident. And because the way that it incites the book is that Desiree goes on a quest to recreate sisterhood with her friends. She really is the glue of her friend group, partially because of the rejection of her biological sister. But I just kept thinking about Danielle. And maybe it is because I am a younger sister. It felt unkind to just write her off as somebody who couldn't get over it and, ghosted her sister. It felt like it wasn't the whole story. And I do think that if it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who's ever wronged you deserves to be back in your life, but it felt like a failure of imagination on my part to not think about her side of the story.
Did you discover anything that surprised you when you encountered her side of the story?
Yeah, I mean, I have some friends, maybe some of you will read this novel like this, who, but you don't have my phone number, luckily, because this friend was texting me every chapter, okay, I'm team Danielle, okay, I'm team Desiree, okay, I'm team January. Like every chapter, he had a leaderboard of who was the best character, and they would go up and they would go down depending on the chapter. And I find myself, honestly, a lot of times, even though I don't believe that that is a healthy way to read fiction, it's a funny way, but I don't know if you're supposed to do that. But I find myself feeling like I am a team Danielle often, actually.
Okay, good, because I'm also really team Danielle, and I did think it was a generous choice to include her.
Are you an oldest sister?
I am.
Oh,
That's
okay.
sorry.
Okay, so it's different for you.
Yeah.
I don't want you to be team Danielle. I want you to free yourself of that.
I have to break free from Danielle. Can I
I'm
ask
a younger sister, so I can pay my penance by being team Danielle.
by being kind to Danielle?
Yes.
Can I ask one more question about Danielle, and then we can
Sure.
move on from her? I see Danielle maybe as one of the characters who's least in the wilderness, or she's built a life where she can believe she's not in the wilderness. She's decisive to the point of maybe ruthless. How does this sort of rejection of wilderness or a fantasy of a straight path serve her, and how does it hinder her?
So Danielle is an anesthesiologist. She has a husband who I guess in the real world maybe wouldn't have a job anymore because he worked at the EPA. And but she's got twin children. She's active in her church. She owns a home in Washington, D.C. She's actually the most terrified of ending up back in the wilderness, even though on its surface it looks like it would never happen. She has built her life. Her life is sturdy. She is the most terrified. And I think that has to do with just people that I know. This is why I feel like there is no clear way to guarantee that you feel grounded in your life, because many people that I know, friends who it looks like they have it all together, are the ones who feel they have the least together. They're the ones who I don't hear from them in 6 months, and when I do, they tore their whole life apart. What have you been up to? Oh, you left your husband, you quit your job, you shaved your head. What happened? And what happened was they did not feel like themselves within that edifice that they had built.
Next time you see me, my head shaved, freaking out. You'll know
I think
what
you would look
happened.
very cute with a shaved head.
Thank
so.
you. I'm going to do it in your honor. I want to bring us, I've got so many questions about the end of the book, but they're careful so we don't give things away. I think it's all right to speak to, in part 3, we get these sort of short first-person chapters from characters who we've mostly viewed from a close outside narrator. What was the choice to give them this opportunity to speak for themselves?
Well, I can't really talk about it without spoiling, but basically...
It's a hard one, sorry.
It has to do, without getting too inside baseball about it, it has to do with my belief in how a novel's form has to mirror what is happening in it. And so what happens in the novel necessitates a change in the storytelling style of the novel. Without spoiling anything.
I know. I had to pause and think about that for a second because it's such an interesting concept. I want to stay on the subject of the characters' voices, perhaps a less spoiler-ridden. But I read that some of the voices we experience in the audio version are longtime friends of yours. What was that experience like?
It was really great. So there's 2 actors who, in addition to myself, read the audiobook. I only read a little bit, but the actor Asia Naomi King, who I think is probably best known for playing, what was that character's name? Michaela in How to Get Away with Murder. She was nominated for a supporting role in Lessons in Chemistry. And the actress and TV writer Ashley Nicole Black, who most recently I think was in the writer's room for Shrinking. And we were just like the 3 very artsy, nerdy Black girls at our middle school. And they went to like the better high school on the other side of the tracks than me. But we always supported each other and stayed in each other's life because the 3 of us knew very early that we were interested in our artistic life. They made me do a lot of performing that I didn't want to do, but that's peer pressure in junior high. So like I was in plays, I was singing things. I can't sing. They can. But we stayed in each other's life, and when they were giving me like they give you, if you're lucky, your publisher gives you these little clips of people auditioning to read your audiobook. And the people were really talented, but they just didn't sound right for this book. I just asked if I could use my friends. And luckily, because they're working Emmy-nominated and Emmy-winning actors and writers, it wasn't like I was just like, I have these friends. They don't have any like IMDb page, but trust me, I was able to do it. And it was a really lovely experience. Yeah.
What was the phone call like asking them to do this with you?
I texted them. Well, because Asia was in Austria. Asia's husband is Austrian, so she's often in Austria. So I just texted them on our little nerdy junior high group chat and was like, you can say no, but can I put your name forward? Because they still had to do like an audition, et cetera. And they were both very excited about it. And it's interesting. So I only read a little bit. I only read the Monique sections. And when I recorded last, and the director said that there's something that our voices have in common. People from LA think they don't have an accent. And it is because we grow up thinking we sound like the people on television, because a lot of them live in LA. But that's an accent, obviously. And so she was like, you guys have similar accents. And I really didn't, it's not occurred to me, but I think that the voices make sense together.
Are there other friends who have supported you through both the writing and publishing of this book that you've had a similar relationship with as these characters?
As the characters? Yeah, I have, this is very LA of me, but I'm an Aquarius. And so Aquarius a lot of us, not all of us, we like to keep friends. Although I was accused of Aquarius like to ghost people, that's not true. We like to keep friends of different categories. We don't necessarily need everyone to be our best friend. We have a lot of these are my friends from grad school. These are my friends from undergrad. These are my friends from my first job. We don't necessarily need them all to be one. And so I have my friends from college, and I also have my friends from Iowa and I have my friends from just living in New York.
Can I ask another careful question about the ending? Something that we've already talked about, which is that a portion of this book takes place in 2028 and 2027. What was the process of writing the future like for you?
Well, so I always thought the book would project into the future. I started writing this book in 2016, in the fall of 2016, and then something happened in the fall of 2016.
What happened?
And for a while, I did not work on this book because I was like, oh, we're in an alternate timeline now. I don't know what might happen in this country or the world now. And then after maybe a year of that, after some of the reports about how foreign entities were using social media to spread misinformation, et cetera, I realized, oh, the thing that I had been fixating on was like, oh, what might happen in a general election, but there are these other trends that are like being baked into daily life that are not as tied to who is in office. They are just part of what is happening. And these are things I can think about and try to project into the future without worrying about whether I'm right or wrong about who will be in office when the book comes out. And they're not all negative, you know, some of them are just the way that we live, like trends like the gig economy, how are people making a living? Trends like, in the years that I worked on this book, being a social media influencer went from something that was terribly cringe and seemed kind of griftery to just another kind of job that people have, right? This is how some people make money, and sometimes it seems like a more secure job than a lot of jobs. And how people think about community, particularly in the cities of New York and LA. So when I was able to feel like I was thinking about trends, where people are getting their news, how are people even meeting people to date, those kinds of things, it made me feel more confident to project into the future and feel like, because those things, for better and for worse, they're going to be slower to change than, I don't know, what is the makeup of Congress at any one time?
Sure. Do your characters feel like they belong in New York and LA? What is that sense of belonging for them? Or is it important to belong to a specific place?
Well, there's characters, these 4 women, they live only for a little bit of the novel all in the same place. And then they don't live in the same place, which happens often in friend groups. And they mostly live on either one coast or the other. And sometimes they've made the choice. Like the character Nakia is, for all intents, it looks like she's thriving in New York, but she just doesn't like it. So she decides to move back home to LA. And the character January, it's more because of circumstances. She needs support because she's trying to raise her children. So she moves back home to LA. And Desiree is running from LA for like grief reasons. She cannot live there. And I think that they feel at home as much as I think is necessary to feel to stay in a place. Like none of them, except for one of them, does move away. One of them leaves the country. But I think that until that moment, even she would have said that she felt at home.
When you were writing this book, I mean, it's studded with references to other writers. Who was most influential?
Most influential?
Or who several people helped influence this book?
So you're talking about the epigraphs, right? Okay, so the novel has several epigraphs between the parts, and at the beginning, they're from just Black women writers that I admire. So from Audre Lorde and Wanda Coleman, who was a really prolific LA writer, and June Jordan and Toni Morrison and Gail Jones. I mean, I love all of them. I probably would add to that Toni Cade Bambara. I reread The Salt Eaters while working on this novel, which is a trippier novel than I remembered the first time reading it. And I also love the writer Edward P. Jones. I think that he is wildly underread in this country, but like one of our greatest living writers. He's written 2 story collections and 1 novel that won the Pulitzer. So it's crazy to say somebody's like he's not underrated, but I still think he's underread because he has won a Pulitzer for The Known World. And yeah.
Octavia Butler is also mentioned, especially near the end of the book, who's a personal favorite of mine, and I teach Bloodchild whenever I really want to freak people out. How did her work guide your writing about the near future?
So when I was thinking about Octavia Butler, I was particularly thinking about the role she plays sort of like in LA. I think if there are 2 people that people in LA think about a lot when they're thinking about the future of the city and like who are the kind of people who have predicted it. They were talked about a lot during the fires earlier this year. It's probably Octavia Butler on like the fiction side and Mike Davis on the nonfiction side. Mike Davis, who passed away, I think, last 2024. And I think that Octavia Butler, especially Parable of the Sower, the way that she talks about so much of LA, I feel like is correct. But there's this part in this book where Monique says that she does not agree with one thing that Octavia Butler predicts in Parable of the Sower, which is who will be the aggressors when things fall apart. So in Parable of the Sower, it is really like the people on the margins, like kind of drug-addicted, unhoused people who attack the housed people. And Monique believes it will be the opposite, that it will be housed people who decide they have had enough of this population on the margins and get rid of them. And I agree with Monique, but I also don't necessarily agree with Monique's assessment of Butler, because so much of Parable of the Sower is told through the POV of a cult leader, you know, like a 17-year-old future cult leader. Yeah. And so we have to take her judgments with a grain of salt. Yeah.
I was really geeked out in that section. I adore that novel, and so I really adored listening to those characters' conversation. I know we can't talk about the subject matter so much in the resolution of the book, but how did you come to the resolution of the book? When did you sort of have that idea spring into your imagination?
I was probably about halfway through the book when I realized how the book needed to end. I mean, I kind of always knew on an emotional level how it needed to end, but concretely. And again, it had to do with those trends, thinking about, I will say that, especially observing across the country the various responses to the protests and uprisings in 2020 really kind of solidified my thinking about the end.
I've read you say that fiction seeks to scratch the surface of certain truths. What are the truths that The Wilderness is seeking to scratch at?
When did I say this? I said that?
In an interview.
Oh man, you end up saying all kind of things. I think that if there is, I'm hesitant to talk about like what a person should take away from the book. Sure. But I do think that the thing that I took away from writing this book was that, especially in this country, to meet the challenges that are in front of us, people have to think a lot differently about what constitutes community. And it can't just be the people who look like you or who worship like you or who are the easiest to get along with. We have to be more expansive. And it's not just to help the least among us, but it's literally to help ourselves also, because there are so many people who have been able to capitalize on our hesitancy to be broad in our ideas of community to just separate us all apart. And they're not even, we're really living in a time of a lot of sticks and no carrots because they're not even giving the people who they said they were going to give the carrots to the carrots. They're just making you isolated and you still don't have any carrots. And so people, that if there was anything, I would say that it's that. People have to figure out how to be more expansive in their idea about who there is room for in their community and who is worth fighting for and protecting.
At the end of the wilderness, there are a lot of sticks, but I still get the sense reading it that there is hope. I mean, there is a carrot of possibility. How do you see hope factoring into the end of the novel?
Well, I think that this novel, the whole of it, is an exercise in hope. And part of why, going back to when you were saying the way that I'm like a maximalist when I describe what it's like to be alive right now, is the hope that there will be a future, somebody will be curious about this, like that we will still exist. That when I'm like going back to reading, turn of last century, like Russian literature, we read it, and these people were writing, they had no idea what was coming for them. In like the 1870s, they had no idea the way that their world was going to change. But we read it now, and it gives us insight into a little bit of how those next 30, 40 years were going to play out. And writing the novel itself is an act of hope that there will be people now who can benefit from it, but that there will be some kind of future where somebody will benefit from it as well.
That's lovely. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want readers to know about the wilderness?
It's really funny.
It is really funny.
There's a lot of jokes. It's not satire, but you will laugh.
It is really funny, and it's really good, and so is The Turner House. So I'm hopeful that everybody here will take the time to read both of these novels. They're both wonderful. Angela, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to take a minute and go to audience questions, but yeah, let's clap first.
Oh, thank you. Clap for you.
We have some time set aside for audience questions, and if you have one, I'll ask you to come up to, we have a microphone sort of set right there at the side of the stage. Or I can ask like 100 more questions. Oh, there's another one here. If you can be so loud, can you be so loud? Is it working? I think so, yeah. Perfect. Make yourself at home.
I'll leave it at a medium height. Hi. So I'm curious. Yes. No. I'm gonna let you do it. Okay. So I feel like literary fiction for a long time has really platformed white male authors, like Jonathan Franzen, Jeffrey Eugenides, like all these big authors, and it feels like those authors are great, but it's crowded out a lot of other voices. And then this year, I feel like maybe because of the political climate we're in, there have been all these think pieces about the death of the white male novel, which has made my eyes roll out of my head, but...
That's fine.
Yes, because God forbid other voices have 5 minutes in the spotlight, but I just feel like I'm really curious to hear what your experience has been like in a genre that has often platformed white male authors to be a black female author in this space.
It's been good. I mean, there's always been other writers besides Jeffrey Eugenides, I love Middlesex, and Jonathan Franzen. I think that it's interesting because some of these complaints also have to do with just like the breakdown of influence of traditional media. So there's not like you're going to get a profile in the New Yorker and that means that you're the next person, right? Because they don't have the cultural influence they used to have. I personally really love and respect criticism, so I'm not happy that there are fewer places that are reviewing books, etc. But I think that some of the feeling that sort of apparatus has crumbled is just about prestige, because they're still selling books. They're still selling books. You can look on the bestseller list right now. They're still selling books. It's just, do they have the place? Are they being crowned like the current public sort of literary intellectual? No, and no one quite is in the same way, because the media space is just, can't really put anyone there the way they used to be able to.
Thank you for your question. Next question.
Okay. This is very short. Oh. Thanks. That's great. So, I'd like to know what you think about how COVID has affected us. I was not born to live through a pandemic. I mean, that's how I feel. I'm like, what? And now I feel like I wasn't really born to live through what we're going through now. It's like, what? So I'm wondering if you see, how you view that in the continuum of the world. And the other thing is, you gave a great interview for you. I thought she really showcased you.
Thank you, Audrey. You did a great job. Don't cry.
I weep, I shave my head, I become Danielle, I run into the wilderness.
Thank you.
So it's interesting that you bring that up. I did a talk in LA on Monday, and very different audience, no offense, but actually, and the biggest way was that there was just like a lot of young women there, and apparently a lot of them had found out about this event looking at the related events in the bottom of Eventbrite posts. So like, it's basically, do any of you guys remember meetup.com?
Yes,
I
I
guess-
joined so many groups and went to 0% of them, yes.
I went to a few in New York in the beginning of like moving to New York because I wanted friends. So I guess these Gen Z people, they don't know, I don't even know if meetup.com exists anymore, but they're not using it. But they are doing this thing where they're just sort of trolling through Eventbrite, looking for things where they might meet people at. And so there was someone there who was talking about like the challenges of making friends, and she had only lived in LA for 3 years. And I reminded her that things have been weird post-COVID and said she needs to grant herself a little grace, because people are still trying to figure out how did they used to do it? How did they used to just be outside and bump into people and interact with people? And also, I think a lot of us, our social batteries they have not fully recharged. Just, it's easier to stay inside now. We know, that muscle is strong, the staying inside muscle. And so, it's hard for her, because in your 20s is when you really you need like these friendships. They're almost their own kind of romances, these like friendships. And I think that's one way that I think COVID has affected us. But I also think that misinformation went into overdrive because we did not have somebody in office who was confidently projecting science and just order as something that was important. I think about people, I have friends, I had a friend who was living in Berlin at the time, and she was talking about how the doctors came to her when she had COVID. She didn't have to go stand in a weird line for a long time to get her nose swabbed. They came to her. And just the ways that, in a lot of ways, we were just left on our own in a way that I think nobody expected we would be. And it was startling. I think that has also, when you see people kind of gleefully celebrating tens and of thousands of people losing their jobs who have, been longtime civil servants, it is because the sort of, not those exact people, but the government writ large just kind of like said, you guys can tough it out. Over 1 million people died, that's okay. And that changed the way people felt about like basic social contract. Like, I'm paying taxes, but they don't care if we die. And so now people who, work for the National Park Service, they had nothing to do with that, obviously, but people are gleefully celebrating that these people are being downsized. And I think it is related. And it's happened in other parts of the world also. But yeah, you were not meant to live through that. None of us were. And then I do think we're still living, where it's at a time of like sort of very rapidly branching out timelines where it's like one thing leads to another thing. And it is not, we're not as especially American culture, like a very individualist, like you're supposed to be busy bootstrapping. You're not supposed to be actually building community and like figuring out how to galvanize people to have some kinds of stopgaps against all these attacks against democracy. It's not actually something, even those of us who were lucky enough to take civics classes, et cetera, they didn't really teach us how to do that. And so we're seeing in real time what that sort of lag in just being prepared for something like this, what the result of it is. But I actually don't think it's hopeless. I just think there is a lag. And in the meantime, terrible things are happening.
We have another question from the back of the house from Susan with Michigan Writers.
Thank you, Kendall. Angela, I'm really touched by your sense of literary citizenship. And on that note, I just want the folks in the audience and those listening that we have some really cool things going on this weekend that are right up that alley. Michigan Writers at the Public Library is sponsoring Copy the Constitution, literally. Copy the Constitution.
Amazing.
From 10 to noon, free, everyone's welcome. You can see more at the website. Michigan Writers and Poets Meet Musicians are hanging out and performing at Middle Coast tomorrow night. And you can find out all this on the Michigan Writers Facebook. And then Saturday, right in this environment, is the Michigan Poetry Society Conference. So a shout out about all of those things. My question for you is, twice National Book finalist. Tell us what that's like.
Well, I'm a long lister right now, the second time around. I'll find out on the 7th if I'm a finalist again. It's weird because I took a long time, and part of it was I was, busy trying to be middle class and make money doing stuff. But another part, taking a long time to write the second book was, of course, the belief that everything, like these things happened that only happened once in a career, so what is going to happen this time? And so for it to happen again is like, well, why'd you wait so long? You're kind of dumb. Like it could have happened. Like, why didn't you believe it could happen again? So it's really gratifying. It's also, in the meantime, in the interim, I have judged a lot of things, and I know how much work it is to read all those books and the conversations that happen to come up with those lists. So I'm also just really appreciative of the work that somebody has done, like on my behalf and the other writers' behalf.
Do we have any other audience questions? Is it time for me to ask questions that spoil the ending? No, there's another question.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering what your experience was like going to school in Iowa.
Wow.
What was that trepidatious giggle from the audience?
I had a really good experience. I applied to Iowa in 2008, and I got in 2009. So you can take a guess at my finances at the time. I was just happy to, I don't know, they gave me like $17,000 a year or something crazy. I was happy for it because I just had been laid off from like my first job, and it was time to write in a place that didn't cost a lot of money. And there's not a lot of other distractions unless you really start picking up bad habits, or maybe you start to farm, I don't know. But there's not that much to do, so eventually you will write. Or just drink. That's really it. So I really enjoyed it. And I also, it's just like the people who visit, the people on faculty there. I worked with Marilyn Robinson. She was one of my thesis advisors. And Alexander Chi was one of my thesis advisors, are just, they're real people. And it's one of those things that I didn't think that I would get into. I didn't get into most of the places I applied. So it felt really special to be there. Hi.
Hello. As soon as you introduced January and kind of the circumstances she was in, hopefully this isn't a spoiler, where she finds out that she's expecting, I kept waiting for her to kind of reappear in this sort of postpartum haze. And she does, but it's with the second child.
Oh,
sorry.
now you are spoiling.
I'm sorry. I don't know how to ask it. I just thought it was so, I have two of my own, and the way that you wrote about her experience was the more detailed time about her postpartum was kind of how I felt the first. And I was just wondering if that was drawn from, your own experience or just universal experience. I just thought it was so detailed, that feeling of like, every day's the same, and like the tedium of it, and kind of the need that you're not expecting from, your normal life before you have kids.
I have been pregnant. I have had a child. I think that it's a pretty common experience. Like immediate postpartum life is like emotional roller coaster, but it also is your body is like healing, but nobody really cares because there's like an infant to keep alive. So you're kind of dragging around your body. And if you're lucky, you have a lot of support, so you're just sitting still. But often, especially when you have more than one, you've got to just like get up and get about your business of taking care of these children. So yeah, it was both my own experience, but also just, it's one of those things that women just don't, like they just metabolize and then don't, again, metabolizing, but they don't really talk about it a lot. And I actually find that period of time to be, when people talk about, people block out childbirth, no, people block out like the 4th trimester is what they block out. Like childbirth it can't be more than a week, it can be anything from just like a couple hours to maybe 72 hours or a little bit more if you're very unlucky. But it's like a 6-week period of time that people just kind of, they move past it because it's really difficult for a lot of people, not for everybody, but I do believe that period of time, especially in this country, other countries, there's more support that is given, but in this country where it's like, for many people I know, it was like a whisper network just to get a lactation consultation. Like you had to know somebody to know somebody. And so it is a period of time that I think is, like, it surprised me when I went through it myself, like, why haven't I read fiction also just to know stuff about like adult life, or that's what I did when I was younger. Like, why have I never read a lot about this? It seemed like such an obvious thing, because when I was going through it, all these women were like, how many stitches do you have? Are your nipples bleeding? And I'm like, wait a minute, nobody was talking about this 2 months ago when I was pregnant. And now everybody's talking about this. So it just felt like something that I knew I needed to put in fiction. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm a new fan of yours. I've not read anything yet, but I look forward to it.
Oh, thank you.
I have two questions. The first one is, when constructing these characters, just in general, do you ever look to psychological literature to talk about like archetypes or ego structure or anything like that? Or is it just like people that you've known over life that you cobble them together and create something new from all of those relationships?
You know what? It's actually neither. So what I do is very simple in a way. I start with an initial choice. A character makes a choice to do something or not do something. And then they have to make another choice. And then they have to make another choice. And then they become a sum of all of those choices. And when you read it, you apply your own sort of like understanding of what that might mean on a psychological level, or what that might mean according to people you know who made similar choices or refrained from making these choices, and you judge them a little bit, right? And this is how, and that in addition to just like the peculiarities of like the way that they might describe things, like two people would describe just the shape of this room differently. Like they would describe what it felt like to be here differently. Those things are how I build the characters. And so sometimes I decide like that at this point, because they've made all these decisions, this one is inconsistent. And sometimes I'm like, well, that's interesting. They need to do the inconsistent thing. Or sometimes I think, no, it doesn't make story sense. They can't do that thing. They have to do this other thing.
Okay, that makes sense. The second question is, Detroit brings out a lot of strong emotions for a lot of people in Michigan. Mm-hmm. It's such a rich and complex history there, and the neighborhoods are very divided, and you get a lot of interesting people from all over. But most Michiganders have very strong opinions about Detroit. Coming from LA mm-hmm. and having a lifeline of your father and his family there, was it like drinking from a fire hose to get all of that information about the history and the families and the neighborhoods and everything that happened with the Great Migration and then the White Flight and all of that? How does that, I have not read the book yet, as mm-hmm. I said, but I'm looking forward to it. How did you manage all of that and also 13 people?
Well, the thing about a novel is that a novel does not have to be comprehensive in any way about anything, right? Like it really doesn't have to be the definitive like text. And so there's information that is important to, it's a third person narrator, so you can get away with more information, but you never want a novel to feel like an info dump, right? You don't want it to feel like Wikipedia. So for me, like I read all of these things. I think the parts of the novel that do the most work of like talking about history, et cetera, are, so there's the present day of the novel is 2008. In the past is like 1944 or 45. And so the parts in the past do that work. I wrote those parts, I think over like one long weekend without, like I went to an Airbnb in Tacoma, Washington. It's a long story, but Tacoma, Maryland. It's a long story, but I did not take any of my research notes with me because I had already been living with that research for years, and I had been putting off writing those chapters because I felt overwhelmed by all the information. So then the only things that existed in those chapters are the things that I remembered that felt germane to what the characters were experiencing in the setting. And then it was like, after, if I really felt like I needed to just put like some line, I would add it, but for the most part, it's just like one of the chapters, there used to be a hotel called the Dunbar Hotel, which was one of the few places downtown that like Black people of a certain class, not just any Black people, could go to like for a night out to like the restaurant there, because they could not go to some of like the famous like dining establishments in downtown Detroit. And there's a scene in that, there's a chapter where characters plan to go there. and they end up not going there. But like if I had had all the notes, that chapter probably would have been entirely too long. And the like important thing is what happens to the characters would have been lost by all the information I tried to put in there.
Read the book and your face will do what my face just did hearing that was written over a long weekend.
Yeah. That's incredible.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
Angela, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us about your work. And please, everyone, read The Wilderness, read The Turner House. They're truly excellent books. And we hope you'll visit us again in Traverse City when the next one comes out.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this special presentation from the National Writers Series. Don't miss our next event that features the stunning new biography of Peter Matheson, one of the most remarkable writers of the 20th century and best known for his memoir, Snow Leopard. #1 New York Times bestselling author Doug Stanton will talk with biographer Lance Richardson, who wrote True Nature, The Pilgrimage of Peter Matheson. Richardson reconstructs the full scope of Matheson's writer's journey and spiritual quest that ultimately led him to the highest ranks of Zen, even as he inflicted great pain on his family. This October 16th event is live streamed only, and tickets are available now. Go to nationalwriterseries.org.